Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is Gus Palmer Jr., who is a speaker and teacher of Kiowa, and he's also a friend and currently my own Kiowa teacher. I've just started to study Kiowa with him a little bit myself. Welcome, Gus.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have you on the show. Would you like to share your Kiowa name with us too?
Pantainde, which is, I guess, translates white cloud. Mm-hmm. It's a Kiowa name that I got from my grandfather. It was passed on from my grandfather to me.
Very good. I think it's a pretty name too.
Yes.
And also, just to give another small sample of Kiowa language to start us off, I usually ask people to tell us how you would greet another person in your language. How would you say hello to someone?
Actually, there's not a hello, but there's kind of a greetings. Mm-hmm. It's pretty personal. You ask a person, "Hoi pohimda," which essentially asks, "How are you doing?" or "How are you doing?"
Okay.
And usually the response is, if you're feeling good, "Apohimda." So I would say, "Hoi pohimda," and you would respond, "Apohimda."
Apohimda.
Right. And that would
Still
indicate,
a little bit of a tongue twister for me.
Right,
You know I'm a beginner.
Exactly. It's kind of difficult to get that one sound out, that consonantal sound.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll talk more about some of the tricky consonants of
Right.
Kiowa. How about a little bit of background just on the language and the Kiowa tribe? Where approximately do most Kiowas live in Oklahoma?
Most Kiowas live in and around Caddo County, which is in southwest Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And the Kiowas have lived historically in that area since about the 1900s, mm-hmm. and probably earlier, as they roamed up and down mm-hmm. the plains, following buffalo herds mm-hmm. and making raids on other tribes. But the allotments, or what's left of the original Kiowa allotments, are located in that part of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. That's where I grew up. My grandparents were there, my parents, and then of course the children. And that's where most of the Kiowa that I know that first came into being, I guess you could say.
Do you know about how many tribal members there are these days?
I think the membership number is about 9,000, mm-hmm. Maybe a little more, perhaps 10,000. Mm-hmm. And of those numbers, about 400 fluent speakers. Mm-hmm. Most of the speakers are at least 60 years or more. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you're actually one of the younger speakers. Is that because you were raised by your grandparents?
Probably so, yeah. Mm-hmm. I consider myself a speaker. Kiowa came natural to me because I was around my grandparents, and mm-hmm. Conversation was always in Kiowa. And it switched back and forth to English, mm-hmm. but mainly it was in Kiowa. Usually all the commands and the orders: keep quiet, sit down, pass the salt, watch yourself, don't get into trouble. Those things came in Kiowa. So early on, I knew those kinds of Kiowa exclamations, if you want to say, or just everyday conversation.
Yeah. So have you actually spoken it all your life, or was it more of kind of a passive knowledge during the early part of your life?
As a child, I heard it, and I don't recall actually speaking a lot of Kiowa. I could respond in Kiowa, of course, and there were a lot of old people who came to the house. I spent a lot of time.
I'm sure you understood.
Oh yeah. So you hear all the stories, all the joking, all the camaraderie between old people, and the best, and a lot of music, of course. We went to powwows. There were a lot of ceremonials and kind of nocturnal get-togethers where people got together and told stories and exchanged jokes and so on. And so as a child, I heard a lot of that.
Wow. You were lucky.
Yeah, I consider myself lucky, and I think after I went to school, then there was more English, of course, and gradually I kind of forgot about Kiowa until later on.
Do you remember when you first went to school, what that experience was like linguistically? I guess you already spoke some English.
Yes,
because you
I
said
knew
you were
English.
Using both. Yeah.
Right. I attended a government boarding school in the first mm-hmm. grade. There was no kindergarten then. Mm-hmm. And most of the families in where I grew up, where the Kiowa families were a rural group. And so we lived out away from town, and it was just kind of normal. And it was just for a youngster to go to a federal school or to a parochial school, a boarding school. And so I went mm-hmm. to a boarding school, and everybody spoke English. We spoke English. Mm-hmm. I don't recall any time that it was forbidden to speak a native language, although you
do hear a lot of stories about that.
Right. I think probably the generation before us, our mm-hmm. parents were had trouble with speaking.
Yeah. Well, and I know then later in your life you started a more kind of scholarly study of the language, and one of your very famous teachers was Parker McKenzie. Tell us a little bit about what that has been like studying with him.
Yi Som, which is his Kiowa name, and James Mooney translates that into English as double vision. There's a joke in there somewhere, but it's actually an extended, or it's an abbreviated name of an extended story about Yi Som. And but it takes a while to tell you about that, so I'll just wanted to mention that. Parker was now, I also address him Dr. Parker McKenzie, because as you know,
right. He was awarded a doctorate from the University of Colorado.
University of Colorado. And so I write him letters, and I always say, "Dear Dr. Yi Som," and so on.
Very good.
I met Parker about 10 years ago when I was working for the Kiowa tribe. It was kind of an offhanded contact with Parker. Just kind of showed up one day, and we became friends. He started speaking Kiowa, and I was speaking a little Kiowa because I was working there. And then one day he surprised me by writing some things on a chalkboard and explained to me this was Kiowa. At that point, I was interested in Kiowa in a kind of offhanded way, and I saw that it was possible to take symbols and make sounds with them. And I had taken Spanish at one time, so I kind of had an idea what he was doing. He kind of tricked me into actually picking up and writing Kiowa, so I learned from him at that point.
And of course, it's funny that you call him Dr. Yi Som. It's a nice combination of sort of one world and the other world, and then
right.
One day before too long, you'll be Dr. Pontai yourself.
Oh boy,
won't that be nice? And he's rather elderly, isn't he?
Parker yes, he's 98 years old.
Whoa.
And he'll be 99 November the 15th. I think it's when his birthday is coming. He says, I'm hitting for 100. Actually, he wrote me a letter the other day, and he's the oldest Kiowa in the tribe. And I think he's been looking forward to this. I've been corresponding with him over the years in English and Kiowa. We write. And he's always reminded me that he's getting close to that mark. And about a month ago, I got a letter from him, and he had a list of, he keeps a roll of all the Kiowa elders and their birthdays and so on. But he was right at the top of the list, number one. So he's a 19th century man.
That's right. Yeah. Well, he's very unusual. I've heard about him for years through other linguists who have just remarked how unusual it is for an elder. It's not unusual for an elder to be a fluent speaker, but for them also to be a scholar, a sort of scholarly analyst of the language. That's very unusual. And I know he had some collaboration earlier with a pretty famous anthropologist, J.P. Harrington. And they bickered a little bit about how to spell things and so forth, but obviously they had a lot in common, even though the one was Kiowa and the other not.
Oh yeah.
They both really loved to dig into
language. There was always a mutual respect about it, and I think I wish I would have liked to just happen on a conversation or where they were sitting talking about it, or actually putting down things on paper. This goes back to about 1923 or so when they first collaborated, and I think at that time Dr. Harrington was working at the agency in Anadarko. And met Parker, who was he was working in the office as a clerk or something, as I recall, and they hit it off right away, because Parker, I think, had already been dabbling in the language and doing some things, and so he and Harrington got together and they struck up a friendship, and it was a very long one and a very strange one, because there was a hiatus or two here and there, and Parker couldn't explain why it was happening. But at some point, Dr. Harrington would write a letter and say, "I'm here," or "I'm there," or wherever he was.
He was famous for just showing up.
Oh yeah, just show up,
disappearing and then popping up.
He was a wizard, Parker said.
He didn't like to stick to schedules, I guess, and didn't like people keeping track of it too closely either, actually. And then, of course, Parker's been doing this for so long. I shouldn't call him Parker since I've never even met him, but I've heard of him for so long. It almost seems like he's somebody I know. But I know he has been doing this a long time, and more recently, there's a modern linguist that he's collaborated with, Laurel Watkins, who wrote the grammar of Kiowa.
Oh yeah.
And you've also worked with her some.
I worked with her some, not in a direct sense, mainly indirectly through her grammar of Kiowa, which was her work when she completed her doctorate at the University of Kansas, and that was a collaboration. That work was a collaboration with Parker. but it's a very in-depth study, and I think a very complete study of the grammar of Kiowa. And I don't think she's received her due as far as extending an appreciation of Kiowa grammar, but I rely on her text and try to keep in contact with her to keep what I'm doing going. So.
Good. Well, Wordpath will give a little tip of the hat to her tonight. So
I hope so.
Well deserved, I think.
Right.
You know, I forgot to mention one other thing about you when I introduced you, which is that you're also a writer, and you received the Oliver Littlecoon Prose Award, presented by the Native Writers Circle in 1994.
Yes.
Is your writing connected in any way to your language analysis and language teaching?
You know, I've been asked that before, Alice, and it's very hard for me to. I started writing poetry actually before I got into fiction, and I occasionally get inspired, I guess, as they say, to write a poem. And I've been asked on occasion if I thought in Kiowa or felt an emotion or whatever there is that happens in Kiowa, and then tried to do it in English, or vice versa, or so on. And I'm not too sure, although I've tried to write several poems in Kiowa, and I think there are several that may even pass as poems.
Oh, very nice.
But I've never published those, but I've published poetry.
You didn't bring any of those with you tonight?
No, I don't have any.
You did bring a story, though, right?
I do have a story.
Would you like to read or tell your story now? I want to make sure we get it in.
Sure, of course. I'd like to share this with you.
Would you like to summarize it a little bit so we have some idea of what those of us who don't speak Kiowa yet?
Okay. There is a story about, it goes back into the various tales and stories in the oral tradition about Kiowa, the emergence of Kiowa, or the genesis of the Kiowas. And this story happens to deal with the sun, or the sun itself, the source of light. So I always think of Genesis when I read this. But Parker, of course, it's written out in his storytelling mode. There's a kind of a device in the oral traditions among Kiowas, in that there is a mode, there's a tense change in which the verb shifts, and it lends itself to a particular pleasing sound. And what I do is I read this storytelling mode of By Heintiga, which is the name of the story, and then I also read the past indicative, and just to show how these two, how they contrast out of from conventional everyday speech into the storytelling mode. But I'll mainly read from the storytelling mode because it sounds better.
Okay.
This is the story of the sun, or By Heintiga. And Parker has a note here that it's written in the traditional Kiowa storytelling mode, which also can be appropriately dubbed as hearsay mode. And Parker says it's hearsay because Kiowa's gossip. And the second draft, of course, is a conventional indicative, but here's a story by Heintiga. Goigu hagiat all day na, by Heintiga dame. Hongo adame go, by ado de go, on go bonk e ado de. Go an aim yayon me go, by ayay do de. Azai ye go hayal lake e le. Aim go maye. Hongo guiko at san helot, by an aim all get da ye. Habe hongo at san hill gigo, up bon all day no. Nego aim gi hon hill, go ayay tens o hill. Can he don me go up, go zongu do, go ma tonsong he, go by a ko be ha be hill. O baki he pon, gigo oi gu go baha be batone. By saddle hill, no hayal dake ile no sende tone, baba. No on hill, no my on gu hill, no by pan bats oi de hill, no te dom tai, gabon de hill, ha aim doni. And I can kind of roughly tell you in English what's going on here. But the story tells that the Kiowas once lived in a sunless place. And there was, to the east of them, some strangers, and they call them Honga, which is kind of like those others. And they had a light source, and they call it, in the story it's the sun. It's a little ball, and they played around with it. They tossed it around, and they were carrying on. And so Sende, who was a Kiowa the folk hero, got together with some animals, including here we have a top, which is deer. A Songuda is a prairie hawk. A Moantotson, he is a mythical coyote. And the four of them got together and went there with a plan to get involved in the games and somehow get their hands on the little sun or the little fireball and bring it back to camp because they needed the light. Yeah. And so they went over. They somehow, and I always kid the students, I say, they got to join the reindeer games. So they allowed them to join the reindeer games, and so they got involved in the games, and somehow or another, through their craftiness, through Sende's wit, they stole off with a fireball or the sun, brought it back to the village. Sende says, "Bring it over here." They gave him the ball, and he kicked it into the sky, and all the earth was lit up. It's a very interesting.
That represents.
So that represents where the sun came from.
That's neat.
And so the story goes back many, many years.
That's great. One of the things I was noticing as you read it, well, two things. One is the intonation sounded rather different from an English speaker, of course, telling a story. I guess that's part of the kind of storytelling mode, too, to use a certain pitch of your voice. Right. And the other thing was some of the unusual Kiowa consonants.
Oh, yeah.
Would you like to, like, for instance, in that word for deer, that's a up, right?
Up, uh-huh.
And what are some of the other?
Well, in Kiowa, there are 8 native consonantal sounds. And they're native because Parker dubbed them native because they're distinctive sounds. And they're the sounds that you never hear in English. Right. One of them is C. We use the character C to represent this sound, and it goes K, as in goigu. Okay. It's not a C sound, it's not a K sound. It's a soft K, I guess you could call it. The next one is a CH character, which gives us a sound ts, ts, as in same.
It's like a T and an S together in English, except it's used together to begin a word, which we don't do in English.
Linguistically, there's a way to and you could elaborate on that, but for us, you can go into that, of course.
The other to get too technical, but it is interesting. It certainly is something different from English.
It is different, and we have fun, and that's probably you mentioned. We talked about it earlier about what's hardest about Kiowa and what's easiest, and I guess probably the hardest is for students to kind of overcome the fear of making those sounds because they've never made the sounds.
And they feel silly at first.
And they feel silly. Yeah. And people are watching and they're looking around and they're embarrassed and they're young.
That K, the ejective K, as a linguist would say, is one of the most famous ones I know. I've talked to people from other tribes who joke about, those Kiowas, which isn't even, that sound doesn't actually occur in the name of the tribe, but people kind of, they show that they've noticed that.
They've noticed it and they picked it up pretty well.
Right.
And so that's been one of the going jokes, I guess, in Indian countries, that the Kiowas do all this sound. Right. But it's a lot of fun, and when you get used to it, it falls in its place.
And when you think about it, it's all your point of view. Everybody talks funny from someone's point of view.
All right. That's for sure.
Whatever you're not used to just catches your ear and sounds unusual, of course. So those sounds are pretty tough for students. I must say, I've only been to one Kiowa class so far, but when I was sitting in on your class last week, it seems like you did a good presentation and you got everybody making those sounds pretty successfully, I think. So it seems like we're off to a good start.
I think so. I hope so.
So I guess that's one of the things that kind of intimidates students a little bit in the beginning. And I think a good teacher like yourself can overcome that and get people kind of less self-conscious. And
one of the things is to try to get them to start making, relax and have a good time because it's not, I try to eliminate, there's some work involved, but I try to teach the class so that it's fun, so the students keep coming and engage conversation with each other, and that's the best part of it.
One of my mottos in language teaching is, if it's not fun, you're not doing it right.
That's right.
If it's just a chore, you're not doing it right.
I know.
So you got to make it fun. What about, from your point of view, what are the most challenging things of teaching a class? Is there any one? Is it the pronunciation also?
I imagine each time I teach a class, there's always an idea that occurs to me as to why we're doing this. And I think we started out teaching our classes, I think, about at the same time.
Yeah, I was teaching
Comanche
with Lucille McClung.
Was Lucille here then? But at that time, I was pretty convinced that Kiowa, like many Indian languages, was gradually disappearing. There weren't enough young people speaking Kiowa, and I felt a sense of mission. There was a sense of urgency in the Indian country today because many of the languages, you know, are lost, they're gradually disappearing. And so I had this, and I still have that feeling. And as each year goes by, I find myself looking at other areas of the language and convinced that we should be writing it. Convinced that finally that it would be well if we started working with youngsters at a very young age.
Sure, yeah.
And you know, I saw the video that we talked about, and it was an immersion program, of course.
It's a Hawaiian language video.
Did you
we
show
showed
it?
part of that on the show once before.
But it was very inspiring, and I think that
inspiring.
anyone interested in language, even if they're looking at language theoretically, should get a chance to see something like this because it's an eye-opener.
Right.
And it has a lot of good ideas, I think, about
You can
teaching.
talk about teaching languages,
Right.
but when you see it in it's sort of one of some. It's like a twist on that. A picture is worth 1,000 words.
It's reassuring if
you
you're
see
teaching.
those kids speaking Hawaiian.
Right.
When 20 years ago, so many people were saying it's a nice idea to say the Hawaiian
Right.
language, but it's already too late. And you see them speaking it to each other, writing their own little essays in Hawaiian, and just as proud as can be, and playing games and singing songs. And you say,
Right.
it is possible. You know?
It's very
It is
reassuring, and after I saw that, I shared it. My wife and I were sitting watching it, and there were a lot of ideas that just kind of spun out of seeing that segment of that video.
You mentioned your wife. You have children, don't you?
Oh yeah,
I always like to ask people that do have children
Right.
what's happened personally in their families as far as have you passed the language on at all? Have they expressed an interest? Do they speak?
Unfortunately, we're not speakers because Carol and I come from two different tribes. She knows some Kiowa. She hears me speaking Kiowa, of course, and my young son, who was in my Kiowa class, and he stuck it out all the way to Kiowa 3. So he's in Kiowa 3 now. And I try to get him, and I say things to him, and he doesn't really say things in Kiowa, and he surprises me sometimes. He kind of, all of a sudden, he'll say something, or he'll respond in Kiowa to me, and I'll have to take a double look to make sure, is this Jeff
Did that
speaking?
come out of your mouth?
Right, did this come out of your mouth?
Well,
Do
that must
you
feel
actually
good.
remember this? But he's been a good student, and I believe that he's shown a real interest in Kiowa. And so you never know. You know, he didn't grow up hearing and speaking the language as I did. And I wish maybe there was an opportunity for him to do that. Of course,
It's
a lot
difficult
of
when you don't have both
Right.
parents speaking the same language. It
It's
makes
very
it that
hard.
much harder. I think the kind of thing that the Hawaiians did of getting the fluent speakers into the preschool is the key for,
I like
for that
that
reason and
idea.
other reasons. Is there anything like that planned or going on in the Kiowa tribe now that you know?
You know, you hear things. You hear people talking about the possibility of starting language classes. I know you talked with Evans Ray Sekpuhu,
Right.
and he has a community-based language program around Tulsa. And out of that come different age groups, speaking groups, or conversation groups, and all of them are beginning, are more or less at some point of a comprehension or speaking. So, you know, you find all of this happening in various places of the state. I know it's happening there, and at one point, at one time, in Caddo County at Carnegie, where the Kiowa Tribal Office is located, there were classes that were conducted, and they were successful. I don't know if that's still happening. I hope so.
Yeah.
But
Well, like you say, it's pretty urgent these days, so I'm always pushing people and saying, well, let's make sure something happens as soon as
Right.
possible, you know.
It's-
I know
it's always-
it's hard. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and make it happen.
Exactly.
But let's hope that it really takes off. I
I
think the
do.
university classes that you're teaching, I didn't actually say this up front, you do teach Kiowa 1, 2, and 3 at OU. Let's
Oh,
make
yes.
that clear. I think those are very useful. But you really do have to connect with the young kids to really, really save a language, I think.
Absolutely.
It's so much easier for them to learn. Easier to teach them. You don't need a lot of technique.
Right.
But you got to get them together in one place and on a regular basis and so forth. But at least when adults learn, it helps them make better decisions about how to run language programs.
Right.
That's one reason I believe so much in the university classes. You can get language educated Kiowa adults who then are the future in a way because they can
Right.
set up the classes.
it
for the
also,
kids.
just teaching Kiowa, or having Kiowa offered at the university, allows people, non-Indians, to take notice and take note and to take a real interest in languages. I think this is good because there's so much to learn.
yes.
There's a whole
Oh, yes.
cultural aspect to teaching
Absolutely.
languages, and that comes through. You can't help yourself.
You can't really separate the two.
Right. You can't.
And I notice we're getting pretty low on time here. We just
Uh-huh.
have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to make sure, speaking of culture, maybe you could talk about this cape that you brought and tell us the significance about that. And
Okay, this cape here is it's actually a warrior's cape. The Kiowas, my father is affiliated with the Black Leggings Society. It's a warrior society. It's actually a modern-day veterans association. And he revived the Kiowa Black Leggings Society in about 1957. So it's been going on for quite a while. But the red cape is a cape that the warriors wear and perform and dance with. And each November 11th, during Armistice Day and also during Armed Forces Day, they perform and put on the cape and wear a black string shawl and all the other paraphernalia that go along with that particular organization. And there's music and songs and a whole history of what the Black Leggings do.
I've been to one of the spring Black Leggings before, and I was really surprised how much Kiowa was spoken there.
You hear a lot of Kiowa.
I actually heard quite a bit.
At the
It's a
powwows.
very good experience. So that's coming up on November the 11th?
Well, actually, they moved up the date up into, and it varies in October because of weather.
Right.
And also, there was a time where Veterans Day, I think, was moved up to an earlier time, and they decided to stay at that because it was better for people to come out and enjoy the powwow.
Yeah. Good. So we'll check the date. It'll be in late October.
Right.
So,
We'll keep in
and,
touch on that.
Very good. Well, we're just about out of time. Time flies when you're discussing interesting things, but I want to thank you very much for being with us. I hope on I Day. And I do.
Great.
And we'll see you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita.